out of the bottomless pit comes not only smoke, but comes locusts as well. Now, what are locusts? The insects are kind of like grasshoppers. Cicadas would also be, they're all kind of similar. There's distinctions between each of them, and I'm not sure exactly how. I guess we could get a zoologist or an entomologist to explain the differences. But especially for locusts, what are locusts connected with? What do locusts do?
They destroy.
Yeah, obviously it's connected with the plagues of the Exodus, and because they destroy, right? So if a lot of locusts come through, you're going to face a lot of destruction. It's no wonder that the term plague gets connected with locusts. And so when locusts come through, they leave devastation. But in general, most locusts are destroying what? Crops, right? They're destroying, plants. They're destroying trees. These, however, are the reverse. They don't destroy the plants, the trees, the grass. Instead, they are attacking human beings. Notice that they are given authority, or some translations might say power. The word could be translated either way. Sometimes it's translated power, sometimes it's translated authority. But here again, by putting it in the passive, they are given authority, not they have authority, they are given authority, suggests that it is God who is in control of all this. God is the one behind this occurring. But notice as well, it's not an expansive authority. There are restrictions on this. And we'll see some of the things that are restrictions here. And so they're given authority in the sense of they are allowed to do some things. We could also say, well, given power means they're given the ability to do those things. So authority or power, depending on which way your translation says, either way, the idea here is that the given is the important part. They are given the authority like the authority of scorpions. Now, what kind of authority do scorpions have? What kind of power do scorpions have? All right, yes. Has anybody ever been stung or known somebody that's been stung by a scorpion? I haven't either. But the idea here is that stinging, painful experience. And you're suggestive of the power scorpions have over their prey, and when you get stung. Now, scorpions, from what I understand, scorpion stings are not fatal except for maybe very small children, but that doesn't lessen the pain that's experienced. And very similarly, we'll see that these locusts will not cause death, but it will cause extreme torment. And so here are these locusts executing God's judgment on people on the earth. But they have some restrictions. They are not to damage, as we said before, the grass, the trees, and any green growth. So even if we aren't already assuming these locusts were different because they're coming out of a bottomless pit, we now know that they're different because they are acting differently. The usual things that are affected by locusts are not to be damaged by these locusts. And so one limitation is on the scope of their destruction. They can't destroy certain things. But instead, their focus is to be on human beings, except for one particular group. What group is protected from these locusts? The ones who have the seal of God on their foreheads are protected. And so the only people the locusts are allowed to strike are the unprotected. Which brings us back to chapter 7, the sealing of the 144,000. And one of the things that they are protected from is the plague of the locusts. Like the plagues of Egypt here, God is making a distinction between His people and the outsiders, the unbelievers. If you remember the plagues, several of the plagues, the darkness isn't in Goshen. The cattle don't die in Goshen. Right? Where God's people are, they're protected. Same kind of thing happens here. So one limitation is the things that they are told not to damage. Second limitation is who they can injure. And then related to that is that the people that are in danger of these locusts are not going to be killed. The locusts are allowed to torture them, but not kill them. From what I understand, the word that's translated torture or torment is one of the strongest Greek words in suggesting intense pain. This is going to be very bad. Right? There is something extreme here about this torment. Now, the limitations, of course, of what can be damaged, who is protected, and the fact that it's torture, not death. But there's also a limitation on time, this period of 5 months. Now, 5 months, on the surface of it, seems like a very strange number. Why 5 months? Well, the life cycle of locusts in the Middle East is about 5 months. And so that might be what serves as the foundation of this 5 months. But we shouldn't take this number any more literally than any of the other numbers, right? So that might be where the symbol's coming from. But what does it symbolize? All right, so half of 10, 10 being one of those prime important numbers. So suggesting incomplete torment. And realistically, it's 5 months of torment is pretty bad. But it's not a complete torment, right? It's not going to last forever. And ultimately, it's not going to lead to death. But despite that, we'll see here, of course, that people suffering from this plague are going to wish that they would die. Their torture, their torment, is like the torture of a scorpion. Right? So again, we have these scorpions again. So the stinging nature of the scorpion attack. One passage that may serve as a connection here, it certainly has some parallels, is Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 14 and 15. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, of course, Moses is going over a variety of things with the Israelites prior to them going into the Promised Land. And one of the things that he wants to make sure that they do not do is forget all the things that God has done for them by, keeping the law, but also remembering the kind of things that God's done. Verse 14, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. And so, here's this, God protected the Israelites from scorpions. Maybe there's a connection there, maybe not. It could just be a coincidence. But God's people are going to be protected from this, but it's going to be a terrible experience. And that's reflected in the paired phrases of people will seek death, but they won't find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. And so these verses essentially say the same thing, or these phrases say essentially the same thing. The repetition, of course, serves to emphasize the experience that these people are going through. They'll really, really want death, but they won't be able to find death. Now, does this mean that these people are going to be led to the point of suicide, but they can't go through with it? Suicide was a very prominent practice in Roman culture for a variety of reasons, involving loss of honor in a family. Emperors ordered people to commit suicide. People suffering from diseases might commit suicide. And so maybe that's what it suggested, that it'll get so bad that they'll try to kill themselves, but they won't be successful in this. Or is it perhaps a spiritual torment? What is it that they're wanting to experience? Is all of this to suggest a physical torment, or is a spiritual or psychological or emotional one? So what do you think? Do you think the locusts are about this physical thing that's going to happen, or is it psychological, spiritual in nature? But yeah, I mean, we could certainly think of it as being both in some ways. That using God using physical illness, physical torments to cause people to repent. That's a possibility. And so, we could see this as having spiritual qualities and physical qualities. It certainly, I think, has a lot of psychological overtones or spiritual overtones, the exact word here, because what's the goal of this affliction? Punishment, but also repentance, right? So it has kind of a psychological or spiritual end, and so maybe it's a suggestion of a torment of their consciences, and not necessarily some sort of physical torment. Maybe it is a physical component. I mean, think about it, though. The psychological trauma of what happens when the gods fail and somebody else's god comes out on top. I mean, when you think about the Egyptian plagues, or when you think about other types of situations where people don't understand. They follow God or the gods or whatever, however they classify that, as something that, I've done this and I've done all the things that are expected of me, and this doesn't happen, right? Something terrible happens. I'm not protected. It often leads to a lot of psychological and emotional trauma. But of course, on the other side, we can understand how that could happen physically. So if there's a physical torment, people wondering why God or the gods have done this, refused to heal them. Think about this passage, or this set of passages, and maybe there's something here as well. In that here is kind of this emotional torment coming out of these spiritual consequences. So the warnings in Deuteronomy chapter 28 essentially are in the context of the Israelites turning away from God to idols. And Moses warns them, here's some of the things that are going to happen. So Deuteronomy chapter 28, beginning of verse 27. Some of it will be physical. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt, with ulcers, scurvy, itch, which you cannot be healed. The Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, and confusion of mind. You shall grope about at noon, as blind people grope in darkness, but you shall be unable to find your way. And you shall be continually abused and robbed without anyone to help. Drop a couple verses to verse 33. A people whom you do not know shall eat of the fruit of your ground, and of all your labors you shall be continually abused and crushed, and driven mad by the sight that your eyes so see. And then just one more verse, verse 65. Among those nations you shall find no ease, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and a languishing spirit. And so this idea of, if you turn away from God, God will bring upon you, might be physical trauma, could be emotional trauma as well. And so here are the kind of emotional torment the Israelites would face if they turned to idolatry. So if that was God's doing, here are these people that have turned to idolatry, they're working against God's people, and so He's sending them emotional trauma. And so, in one sense, we could certainly see this as a warning or a judgment of the persecutors, but who else could this be a warning to? The automatic answer is Christians, but which Christians? Who could face this?
Those who are giving into the civilization around them?
Yeah, I think that this could be just as much of a warning to those people that are interested in compromise. Look what's going to happen to these people. And you're going to fit in with that same kind of emotional trauma, perhaps physical trauma as well. So we've seen so far the things that the locusts are allowed to do. John then describes the locust for his audience. And several times in his description he uses the word like, or he uses the word likeness, a lot of it depending on which translation you have. Now by saying they were like, or they had human faces like human faces, what's occurring here that's causing the word like to be used? All right, so as a figure of speech, it's known as a simile. What does a simile do? All right, so it's a comparison. So it's not saying with exactness, but presenting an image. It's almost as if John can't describe it. You know, I can tell you what it's like, right, and give you something that you can kind of connect to. But to actually kind of think of these locusts with human faces, gold crowns, that might be pushing it a little too far. It might just be he's trying to find something that his audience will understand. So the comparison is not exactness. The other thing to note here at the beginning as well is the comparison between what's going on here in chapter 9 and the prophecy of Joel. In Joel chapter 1 and 2, Joel prophesies about locusts coming to attack the Israelites because of their unfaithfulness. Now, we could read several passages in all of those first two chapters, but I just want to read a couple to show how there's this connection here. So this is chapter 2, verses 3 through 5. Fire devours in front of them, and behind them a flame burns. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden, but after them a desolate wilderness, and nothing escapes them. They have the appearance of horses, and like war horses they charge. As with the rumbling of chariots, they leap on the tops of mountains, like the crackling of a flame of fire devouring the stubble, like a powerful army drawn up for battle. And so in both Joel and Revelation, we're kind of presented with these locusts are acting like an army. There's kind of an invading army type of feel to them. And perhaps the fact that this is a terrible, violent army is what's responsible for this kind of over-exaggeration of the features. Right? And so the hair really representing the antennae, the teeth to suggest, saying the teeth are like lion's teeth, they're saying they're very destructive, the locusts are going to eat everything up. But how are they described? Well, it starts off with they are like horses equipped for battle. So they're like an invading army's cavalry. And perhaps that's what the symbol is. It says locust, it means invading army. And of course the background here is Joel, some of the passages we just read. So they're equipped for battle. They're coming to engage in warfare. Not only that, on their heads are like crowns of gold. Now, these crowns are the Stephanos crown, the victory, the success crown. Right? You just won the Olympics. You've just run the marathon. So they're ready for battle, and they're going to be successful. So what else does John say? He says their faces are like human faces. Is there some sort of, and then also says, kind of connected with that, another human-like quality, their hair is like women's hair. So is this some sort of demonic parody of the pinnacle of God's creation with the human being? And so, these are kind of demonic forces, and so they're trying to exhibit qualities like human beings? Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say what exactly is John's, but that's the kind of comparison he's trying to make. Maybe the idea of having a human face suggests wisdom and intelligence. This isn't a random destruction like normal locusts would be. Their teeth are like lion's teeth. Also, a passage coming from Joel, particularly Joel chapter 1 and verse 6 is the parallel passage there, suggestive of their destructive power. And so it's kind of the destruction's not random. They're prepared. They're going to be successful, and they are going to be very violent, very powerful. Their scales are like iron breastplates. And again, kind of keeping with that army motif. That they're going to be protected from harm. They're invincible. That before these forces, no one will have success. No one can stand. The noise of their wings, one of the aspects of the locust that's identifiable. And the noise, people talk about how much noise is made by the locust. Well, with a group this size, of course, there's a lot of noise. But it's a noise like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. And then finally we come back to the scorpions again. They have tails like scorpions with stingers and the power to harm people for 5 months. Perhaps what's being played on here are Roman fears, the continual Roman fears of invading armies. Rome was always concerned about its borders. And so for those first century Christians, they were facing a group of people that was always concerned about the outsiders, what was going to happen, what could possibly occur, the destruction that could happen. Questions or comments so far?